Good evening. I'm going to talk to you about the story of a little boat that I built, which I called Báidín. I'll cover why I decided to build her, how I selected the particular design changes I made, the construction itself, the time and costs involved, and how she performed during her first season up the West Coast. It's important to note that I'm not talking about this as an expert. Quite the opposite, in fact. I had no prior experience of boat building and no training in wood or epoxy. But circumstances forced me to build a boat, and the lesson here is that if Mark could do it, anyone can. For a long time, I had wanted to be able to get rid of the outboard motor. It used to bug me that you could spend the entire day sailing peacefully into a quiet anchorage somewhere, and then you'd have to get the outboard motor onto an inflatable, start it up, the noise, the fumes. It sort of slightly defeated the purpose I felt. I tried rowing the inflatable dinghy, and that was feasible for short distances in calm conditions, but in general, it wasn't really a viable option. I would have loved a hard dinghy that could be rowed well and so be able to do away with the outboard, but I didn't want to sacrifice any deck space to stow one, so that was not really an option. Then about 3 or 4 years ago, I saw a Nestaway dinghy at the London Boat Show. This was a nesting dinghy with a standing lug sail rig. It was the first time that I had seen or even heard of a nesting dinghy. In case you are not familiar with what a nesting dinghy is, let me take a minute to describe. Basically, a nesting dinghy consists of 2 independent sections, divided athwart. The bow section simply sits inside the stern section for storage. It's a simple concept and simple enough to achieve with a rowing boat, but for a sailing boat with the dagger board, it is more challenging. The dagger board needs to be in the fore section. If it were in the aft section, it would stop the fore section from being able to sit into that aft section. So the photos here show an early cardboard model that I made just to try and learn about it, but they are good to illustrate the concept of nesting. The photos on top show her fully assembled. The 2 photos on the lower left show the 2 halves separated. The photo in the lower middle shows the bow section sitting inside the stern section, and the photo on the lower right shows the 2 sections nested but stowed vertically. With many, but not all, designs, each half can float independently, making assembly much easier. You simply throw both halves into the water, get into the aft section and pull the bow section towards you and clamp them together, and that's it. This is much, much easier than trying to assemble both together on deck. About 15 months ago then, in October 2020, I decided that I would go ahead and get a nesting dinghy that could be sailed. My first thought was to get a Nestaway, but I decided to investigate if there were other options. It turned out that there were quite a few, although it's quite a niche area. So this is the Nestaway. There were 2 Nestaway dinghies. So this is the one I saw for the first time in the London Boat Show, a 9-foot and an 8-foot. Both are glass fiber, the 9-foot having a clinker effect. They're pre-built boats with standing lug rigs. They're not cheap. The 9-foot with full sailing gear costs £5,400. However, Nestaway didn't respond to my queries, and I inferred from that they had discontinued the production. Since then, I have read that Nestaway has made an arrangement with Drascombe boats, whereby Drascombe will build them, but at that time, they weren't available. The PT watercraft has a very good reputation in North America. It's 11-foot with an unstayed Bermudan rig, and they're beautiful looking boats. It's perhaps more of a sports boat than a working tender. It's a stitch and glue construction, but they're only available in kit form, and as of October 2020, the kit was no longer available. Even if it was available, it would have cost $6,000 for delivery to North America, so it would have been considerably more to ship it to Ireland and then pay import taxes. But at that time, it was not an option anyway. Since then, they've formed an agreement also with another company to make the kits. The Meebo 12, this is a German design and it seems to be quite new. It's not clear how many of them have actually been built. I couldn't find any reviews at that time. It's a more modern rig and the hull has the interesting feature that you can put slats in it and two people can sleep fairly comfortably in it. It's a stitch and glue construction available in kit form, or you can just buy the design. But I wondered if it was more suitable as an inland waterway adventure boat than a tender for the West Coast. The Chameleon. This was designed in the late 70s and it's been very widely built and has a very enthusiastic following. It's 6 foot, it's 10 foot 6 inches long and sports a Spritzel rig and it's stitch and glue construction. Reports of its sailing ability are really good. And because it's been so widely built, there are many blogs and videos available on the internet showing its construction. And that's really useful to me as a novice builder. Her design has been featured in many magazine articles and there's lots of coverage of it. Here is what Danny Greene described, although he would say that, wouldn't he? His summary does reflect the consensus in those articles though. He says, "She served me well and I sold hundreds of sets of plans for her. Over the years, I experimented with various other dimensions, hull shapes, and construction details. I tried boats up to 16 feet in length and with 2 and 3 nesting pieces. Some sailed very well, some towed well, some were stable, some handled rough weather easily, some were light and compact to stow, and some were very easy to build. None, however, combined these qualities in a way that satisfied me. Until Chameleon." He goes on to say, "Surely there are small boats that can outperform her in 1 or 2 areas, but I do not know of any that have these same all-round performance characteristics that make Chameleon an ideal tender for a cruising boat. She is, as well, a very attractive multi-purpose boat that can be easily transported by 1 or 2 people and stowed in a very small place." The Stasha. This is a really interesting boat. It's very different to all the others. It's designed by an outfit called Wooden Widget. It seems to be a French boat builder called Benji that's behind it. He seems to be a quirky alternative thinker who has plans for wooden things ranging from bicycles to caravans. It claims to be the world's lightest nesting dinghy. To quote from their site, it says, "The Stasha is constructed from a lightweight wooden framework glued with epoxy resin. Kevlar fibers are laid diagonally across the framework to reduce twist in the structure, and then a special heat shrink Dacron fabric is applied." So it's a bit like the way we used to build balsa wood model aircraft when we were kids. She weighs only 10 kilos compared to 30 to 50 kilos for all the others. And she also sports a Spritzel rig. In fact, he says simply use an uppy rig. This design intrigued me. The Swampscott dory tender takes a different approach to all the others I came across. It's fiberglass, and the plans are available in this book from Amazon. A mold for each of the 2 sections is made from plywood, and the fiberglass hulls are then made on those molds. It sports a standing lug rig. I couldn't find any evidence to suggest that more than a couple had been built, and I couldn't find any independent review of its sailing abilities. The Spindrift is also a very popular and well-regarded nesting dinghy, available by plan. It's also stitch and glue with an unstayed Bermudan rig. They have 3 models, a 9-foot, 10-foot, and 11-foot. They're nesting. They also have a 12-foot non-nesting one, and over 1,300 have been built. Other designs I looked at included the D5 dinghy, the Eastport Pram, the Nesting 10, the Nesting Light 10, and the Chesapeake Light Crafts Passage Maker Take Apart. But It struck me that a number of these were Spritzels. Now, I knew very little about the Spritzel. To be honest, I thought it was a bit of a toy or a bit of a joke for 8-year-old kids in uppies or for old fellows in Thames barges. But I did some research anyway. So looking at the books that were available to me that might be relevant, the first book, Henry Coleman, Folkhard, The Sailing Boat, his treatise on sailing boats and small yachts, their varieties of types, skills, rig, etc. I first came across this last year when I was looking for a reference to the Drolling Dinghy that Michael Weed was building. Anyway, Folkhard says about the Spritzel, one of the most primitive and at the same time handiest and most useful rigs for a small open sailing boat is the Spritzel. There is no sail that stands flatter than a well-set Spritzel, and it has the merit, when old and somewhat stretched, of standing as flat as ever. It is recommended as superior to many others for an open boat under 16 feet in length. When longer, some other rig is preferable, as the sprit required to set the sail will be found too long and heavy to be conveniently managed, at all events by one person. So there's Folkhard saying, yes, 16 feet, ideal for under 16 feet. Looking at John Leather's 79 book, Spritzels and Luxels, Leather says, quoting from him here, the simplest form of Spritzel needs few blocks and none or few metal fittings, which make it desirable in working boats. The quadrilateral sail does not need a halyard and is bent to a short mast. To set it, the pointed upper end of a spar called a sprit is placed in a rope kringle at the peak, and the sprit heel is supported at the mast by a rope strop termed the snotter. The sail is usually boomless and is sheeted flat for windward work. The head of this peculiar rectangular sail sags under wind pressure, giving an appearance distinctive from gaff or lug sails. He goes on to say, the sail can be made of inexpensive materials, be cut by inexpert hands, and still be made to set efficiently by virtue of its quadrilateral shape and scope for adjustment. The masts and spars are not long, need not be heavy, can be made from timber of only average quality, and rigged with simple blocks and rope strops and seizings, yet function well. These truths still commend the rig to those who like simple sailing. Elsewhere he says, until late in the 19th century, the Spritzel was probably the most widely used sail for small boats in Northern Europe, Scandinavia, and on the eastern seaboard of North America. To sum up from Leather, the Spritzel's greatest efficiency is in simplicity of gear and hence low cost, and its ability to stow mast, spars, and sail in the boat, out of the way of other activities. It is an easy sail to handle after a little practice, and will drive a well-shaped craft without pressing her in a way a boomed sail can do. David Seedman, in his 94 book, The Complete Sailor, and I think this is a fantastic book, I really love it, but he says of the Spritzel, with its low center of effort, short spars that stow easily, no standing rigging, and only 2 lines, this rig is perfect for craft up to 16 feet. And finally, moving on to Phil Bulger, he says Spritzels can have the shortest spars for the power of the sail of all rigs. Quite a statement. There are no other spars, only 2 pieces of running rigging and no standing rigging. If it's skillfully cut and correctly set, it's a highly efficient sail, area for area as well. None of the area is wasted in thin triangles at the corners. The top of the sail has no eddy-making spar in front of it. It has less tendency to heel the boat than most sails because its compact shape allows it to set low above the hull. And interestingly, he adds, the failings of the sail are closely related to its virtues. The head of the sail needs to be stretched tightly from the masthead to the peak of the sprit. If the peak sags, the sail will go out of shape and the boat won't point or foot well close hauled. It takes powerful tension on the sprit snotter to maintain the tension. So I was really intrigued by what those authorities were saying about the Spritzel. it seemed to me, from what I've read there and elsewhere, that it was an absolutely ideal rig for a small boat, but I wondered why it was not more widely used. You know, it has no standing rigging, short spars that can stow inside the boat, lower heeling, low-tech rig, very undemanding and forgiving on the quality of the sail, and very importantly for me, intending to use this as a tender, no boom. So I was keen to go for a Spritzel rig, all else being equal. Now, as of last year, as of late 2020, there were no new nesting dinghies available anywhere. I couldn't find any second-hand nesting dinghy for sale on this side of the Atlantic. So the only option I had was to build one myself. That's not something I would have ever considered beforehand. It's something I'd never done. As I mentioned, I had no training in it, but needs must. So the final choice, Nestaway wasn't available. The dory I ruled out as I couldn't find many people who had made it. The Spindrift had a really good reputation. The Stasha, although I was very interested in it, it was not for a tender, and certainly not for one on the West Coast. The Chameleon and the PT watercraft, which wasn't available. So the choice came down to between the Spindrift and the Chameleon. In the end, I decided to build the Chameleon, although I would make some design changes to it. I decided on the Chameleon, really, I mean, it had a proven track record. It's been built and sailed extensively for about 40 years. It's got a very enthusiastic following, and it's got the Spritzel rig. So I decided on that. The next step then was to go and get the plans. And there's a bit of a story there. The plans are available from a US company called Duckworks. They do lots of plans for lots of boats. You could buy the PDF plans, including a license to build, for $50, or you could get the printed plans for an extra $15. And those printed plans included full-size patterns for all the panels that needed to be cut out. So I thought I might need the patterns. So I went for the printed plans. So an extra $15, I thought, fair enough. Went to check out, and then there was an extra $64, $65 for shipping. So, okay, I thought fair enough there. So it obviously had to be shipped. It was winging its way over the Atlantic. I was following it on the internet to see where it was, and then I could see it was in Ireland, and then it was scheduled for delivery, which was great. So went downstairs to collect it, and there was a delivery all right, but it was a demand from customs for €30. So what could have cost me €41 ended up costing me €120. Now, the irony is I didn't need the printed things at all. The PDF version with just the lofting dimensions would have done me perfectly. But anyway, one of the comments made about the Chameleon in all the discussion on it on the internet is that it can be a little wet for use as a tender, even in the tropics. Mind you, it wouldn't be so much of a problem there. Some of the pictures of other boats on the internet showed evidence of people trying to retrospectively increase the shear. I decided that I would modify the design to increase the shear from the start. Doing this would add weight, windage, and a little cost, and would also increase its bulk when stowed. But I decided that those disadvantages did not outweigh the potential benefit. One disadvantage I was not prepared to live with, though, was to end up with an ugly boat. So I had no idea of how much I should increase the shear by, how much would have been enough to get the effect I wanted to, and how much would have looked ridiculous or ugly. I asked around, and many DBOGA members were very helpful. In the end, I decided to increase the shear by 6 inches at the bow and 1 inch at the stern and ½ an inch at the rollock position. Of course, this meant that I had to change the dimension of many components and work out the new loftings. It also meant that the way the components had been arranged to fit into the minimum number of sheets of plywood had to be worked out again, as most of the components involved were going to be substantially bigger. So that whole exercise required a lot of thought, but in the end it was easy enough and went off without a hitch. What did cause me difficulty, though, was the imperial system. Chameleon's plans were all in feet and inches. or should I say feet, inches and eighths of inches. I thought I could adapt and get my mind around it, and I would have if it was just that. But I was using a CAD system to draw the modified lines, and that CAD system really didn't like inputting lengths in feet, inches and eighths of inches. So I really would have been better had I at the very start just converted everything to metric and worked with it. But anyway, looking here, these diagrams, the one on the left is the profile of Chameleon as she was designed by Danny Greene. In the middle here is the combined original lines with the changed lines I was going to build. And the one on the right are purely the new lines that I was going to build. As I say, many of the panels in the lofting plans were very different dimensions, so I couldn't use, I had to redo exactly what would come out of what sheet, but that all went off without a hitch. Just there's a copy of the page where I made the definitive changes to the design, and they worked out well and they were correct. So that's the background to why I was going to build a Chameleon and the Chameleon I was going to build. So then on to the whole process, the construction itself. This was in December 2020, and it looked as if there was sort of a suspicion that there'd be a very severe lockdown just after Christmas. So I wanted to be prepared for that, and I wanted to get all the materials that I possibly could. So in general, I actually did have everything by about Christmas to work on it. The first thing was the wood. Now, Cormac knew that I was building this, and he was giving me advice on the wood and the need to get very straight grain, tightly packed rings, etc. And he very kindly said, you know, if I wanted, he'd come out with me and help me pick it out. So that was absolutely fantastic. We went to where Cormac had heard there was good wood, but it wasn't as good when we got there. We went to another place. We went to a third place. Cormac was directing forklifts, lifting crates of wood here, there, and everywhere. And eventually we found these two at the very bottom of a pile that Cormac was very pleased with. And they really were beautiful. I got the plywood out near the airport. I got it's the Joubert, the French marine ply. There, me bringing it home one wet evening. I cleared out the garage to make space for this, and it was all ready to go. The first thing then was Cormac very kindly offered to come and show me and help me how to rip the wood. So we spent a day doing that in January, and it was great to get that encouragement and that insight into how to go about it. Here we have ripped one of the main planks, and this wood here we'll see for the gunnels, here for the mating, the laminating the support on the mating bulkhead. This would eventually become the mast. So that was a good day's work, and it really got me started. Next was lofting, which went smoothly. It was just a matter of, once I had all the measurements, it worked. It went very, very smoothly and easily to cut out the panels I needed. The first sort of real bit of a challenge was making the mating bulkhead. Now, because the boat would end up being sawn in half, there were strains and stresses across midship that just aren't there on a single piece hull. So there were two mating bulkheads which needed to be particularly strong. So I needed to make a mold and laminate three of those pieces of wood together that we saw, which would form the top of the mating bulkhead, and then that is bonded to the mating bulkhead itself. So that was the first bit of a challenge to get me going. Because the boat itself was longer than the longest sheet of plywood, it was all the panels, or the side panels and bottom panels, were made in, there were two that needed to be joined together. So it was a matter then of temporarily joining those panels together. Now, all of the panels that were port and starboard, I would get the mirror images, clamp them together, and then finish them together as one piece. So I planed them down. So every piece was absolutely symmetrical side to side. Then the assembly started. So it's called stitch and glue because literally the panels are stitched together. You can use cable ties or copper wire, stitched together, and then they're glued once you assemble the shape. So here are the two bottom panels being stitched together. And then they're opened up, and this gives you the floor really of the boat. There's a specific dimension of wood here. You need to tension it in this way to get just the right angle, and then the side panels are added. To that, then the mating bulkheads that I mentioned, there are two of them, one for each section, are put in place. Then the stem is stitched in place and the transom. So at this stage, all the pieces are together and nothing has been glued. So they're all stitched together. Now, from what I could gather, the biggest risk in the entire construction was this particular stage and gluing it if everything wasn't absolutely aligned. So I put huge amounts of effort into aligning, measuring and remeasuring. And basically, you know, you could twist, you could, if you push down on opposite sides of it, you could twist the boat significantly enough. So the actual way to measure that are the diagonals. So you'll see there two bits of string measuring from the starboard top of the stem to the port top of the transom, making sure that's exactly the same as this side here. So I did that, I did it again, I measured and measured and measured, and in the end it was actually perfect. So the next step was to start gluing it in place. Now, to quote from Meebo, the person behind West System Epoxy, he's a very good book. He says a fillet, so first of all you fillet it, put in thickened epoxy. He says a fillet is a cove-shaped application of thickened epoxy that bridges an inside corner joint. It is an excellent technique for bonding components because the surface area of the bond is increased and serves as a structural brace. All joints that will be covered with glass cloth will require a fillet to support the cloth at the inside corner of the joint. So first of all, you put on this thickened epoxy and you shape it to a very specific radius, and I'll show you that on the next picture. Then you epoxy on 2 layers of glass fiber tape. One is 2-inch, and then you cover that in a 4-inch. And then I cover the whole lot in a material called peel ply. Now, peel ply is, I think it's just a type of polyester, but it's got this magical property that it absorbs epoxy, but yet it doesn't stick to it. So you can put the peel ply on, you can smooth it down, you let it dry, and then you come along and you just rip it off like a sticking plaster. And it leaves the real epoxy and tape, etc., underneath it in exactly the shape you wanted it. And it leaves it smooth so that you don't need to grind it or sand it as much as you would need to do otherwise. I mentioned the radius. Getting the radius of that fillet is important to get it consistent, and the radius needed depends on the angle at which 2 sheets are joining. If the angle isn't that great, you need a bigger radius, and if it's a very pointed join, you need a smaller radius. So you make from a plastic spreader templates of the relevant radius, and then you just use that along the joint. You put in the epoxy, you rub it down with that, and you get exactly the radius you want. On the other side, and we'll see in the next picture, when you come to round the outside, you need to round the joints there to a specific radius as well. And that radius depends on the angle also that they join. So I made a whole set of templates of different angles that I could use when trying to smooth the outside seams. So looking here, the top left photo is the hull turned over after the insides had been filleted and taped. I've removed the stitches. That's actually easy enough to do. I was worried, I was nervous. I thought that would be difficult, but it's really easy. Copper is a great conductor of heat, and epoxy melts at a relatively low temperature. So it's just a matter of heating one end of each of the stitches with a blowtorch and pulling them out. So the top 2 pictures there are of the hull as it was before I got at it with my templates, and you basically round all of the seams to the radius you need. So you have a grinder and you just go over it. I thought it would be very difficult. It actually was easy enough and very, very rewarding to get those curves of exactly the radius you want on each side. The next step was to tape the external seams. You can see tape there running under the fiberglass, and then to actually coat the entire outside of the hull in fiberglass cloth. The inside floor was also covered in fiberglass cloth as well. Now, speaking of fiberglass, and quoting from that Mead Gudgeon book again, he says in that very cold weather can present greater problems. Resin viscosity increases and metering with dispensing pumps becomes almost impossible at very low temperatures. Thick epoxy is hard to handle and it may not adequately penetrate wood for good adhesion. During slow cures, coated surfaces may be contaminated, especially by moisture and carbon dioxide, and become cloudy. Cold wood substrate and frozen epoxy can add to difficulties. Now, the epoxy will set when it's 4 degrees or above. So I thought, okay, 4 degrees, 13 degrees. Sam Devlin, another famous stitch and glue guy, had said the optimal temperature is 24 degrees. I was doing this in February in the garage, and I thought, okay, I won't do it below 13 degrees. So I got a thermometer to check that out. And in reality, 13 degrees was too cold. The pumps would not work. The epoxy was too viscous for those pumps to lift the liquid up at 13 degrees. I'd keep this in the hot press overnight, but during the day it would dip down. So I made this box and it worked well to keep the epoxy, the components warm. A hot water bottle on one side, a square gin bottle filled with hot water on the other side to increase the surface area between the two boxes, and surrounded it with a cardboard box. So I did this at 13 degrees, and was only when I was doing other things in May and the temperature was at about 20 degrees, I realized it really was far too low, far too cold. The mixed epoxy was very viscous and really difficult to work with. It would have been so much easier to do it at higher temperatures, but you live to learn. I don't doubt that the final product is as good and as strong. It was just applying it, and particularly getting it absorbed into the fiberglass tape and cloth was difficult. Anyway, moving on to the remaining structural things were to get the gunnels on and to get the knees on, to basically solidify the top of the boat and its wobble. So the knees, and we'll see a lot more about these knees later on, particularly on the mating bulkhead here, are very important. Anyway, I got the gunnels and the bulkheads on, and the big day arrived. The 22nd of February last year, when the boat, it was structurally there, it was a matter of cutting it in two. So it was a bit of exciting, a bit worrying or frightening. In the end, it worked very, very well. You just simply cut the layer of plywood around there, and the two parts come apart. And for the first time then, I was able to nest one half inside the other half. So things were moving on. You will note here, and we'll get back to it, the knees there are triangular. And there is quite a gap between the aft bulkhead of the forward section and the aft section there when they're nested. Things then could turn to constructing the interior of the boat. After carefully protecting this bulkhead, the first thing you do is you cut a big hole in it for the daggerboard case. So that's a daggerboard case added. And then there's a large solid piece of wood epoxied in place there. That's the mast step. Then this boat is not mine. This is the way it should look according to the plans. The plans called for two very agricultural looking buoyancy tanks at the back there, and this long seat extending the length of the aft section. I didn't really like that. I thought I would rather do something else, which I did, which was quite a bit of work, and I'm pleased with it, and it's been really, really successful. And that was to build a wraparound seat section at the back with integrated buoyancy areas there, but with little storage containers here. Now, these are so useful for leaving the handheld, your coat, a bottle of water, your camera, whatever. This whole unit took a lot of time and effort to do and to work out, because I had to do it such that the bow would nest into it. It took a lot of time, but I was very pleased to have done it. And here we can see the forward section actually nesting into it. So it worked, and it worked well. The next steps then were to construct and fit the forward locker. Now, because I had raised the shear by 6 inches, the locker was 6 inches higher than it would have been otherwise. So it's a locker, but it also doubles as buoyancy. So because it's higher, I made it shorter. to give a bit more space in the forward section here. The locker itself is brilliant. It is deep. I got a watertight and lockable cockpit lid. There's easily enough space in there to take camping gear for a week, I'd say. It's just really, really useful. The front seat is epoxied in as well around the daggerboard case, and the skegs then were epoxied on. One reason there are two skegs is to make it easier if you are assembling it on ground. It stops the aft section from wobbling too much. I mentioned the knees. The plans called for knees of 6mm deep. I wanted to reduce the area of the knees to allow, particularly on that one I showed in the aft section, to allow the two to nest together more snugly. So I wanted to decrease the area of them. So I ended up making them 18mm thick. I put in 3 layers of 6mm with the lowest level, and you can see it here and here. The lowest level is actually tucked under the gunnel. So the whole thing is actually tucked under the gunnel. I drilled holes in all of them, which I find really useful. And each knee easily supports the entire weight of that section if you just want to hoist it by one knee. So the knees, getting them like that, it's surprising amount of work for me to get them just right, but I'm happy with the strength of them at the end of the day. Then it was a matter of finishing the interior, epoxying it, and I treated it with International Interdeck, which I found really good. On the underside, I was going to put metal rails on the skegs, but from what I read and from talking to some other people on the internet, they strongly advised against it. They said, no matter what you do, you're going to be drilling and you are going to have rot problems sooner or later. They, at least the people I was communing with, overwhelmingly said the way to go is to get Kevlar or Aramid tape, which I did. And I coated the skegs with that tape. Here you can see it here with peel ply, and it's taped in place. I coated the lower section, anywhere that it might be exposed, with that tape. It cost €44 for the tape. It's not that expensive. It's reputed to be very difficult to work with. Everything I read said it floats off the epoxy. But armed with that knowledge, I actually didn't have a problem. I weighed everything down. You can see here, I taped with insulating tape the peel ply so that it wouldn't float off, and I didn't have a problem at all. Now, jumping out of sequence, but as we're talking about that Aramid tape, how did it hold up? Here is after one season. This boat has taken a lot of abuse. You know, it's a working boat. I built it as a tender. I used it and sailed it hard. It's been pulled over sand, shingle, rock, and those skegs are worn slightly, but not bad at all. You know, an annual maintenance. I may put another thin layer on this year, I'm not sure. This is the lower force section of the dagger board. Now, I don't know how many rocks I hit doing 3, 4, maybe 5 knots. So I actually think it's scuffed, and it's scuffed badly enough there, but I think it's done an incredible job, and it was really good. Because I changed the design, the aft design, and put in my wraparound seat, I couldn't use the seat that they said, that long straight one. So I had to design and build a different type of unit, and you can see it there. And I was pleased with how that turned out. I had tried to steam wood to bend it around it, but that didn't work. But I'm pleased. So that's, you sit on that rowing seat, but it was something else I had to design. I put polyurethane foam in the buoyancy sections, although the plans didn't call for it. I just thought better safe than sorry. There you can see in the locker, there's quite an amount of polyurethane foam there in space that couldn't be used for storage normally. And then it was to do the exterior. Now, in Danny Greene's instructions, and they're about 15 pages of typewritten ones, he said, step 49, fare the entire hull by applying a mixture of epoxy, phenolic microballoons, and a bit of silica with a spreader or a long batten. Sand smooth. Any degree of fairness and smoothness can be achieved, depending on how much time you want to spend on it. And in retrospect, I spent more time than I would do again, given that it is a working boat. I could have spent a lot more as well, but I was pleased with the overall finish. In terms of the what I did put on it, the advice I read, say from Sam Devlin, he's saying, you've really two choices for paint. Either go for the cheapest house paint or go for the most expensive two-part marine paint, that don't go anywhere in between. I went for the expensive two-part marine paint, and it worked well. Note also here what I got. I got a fender strip that runs the entire gunnel, the entire way around the external. So it's about 1.5 inches thick. And it means, going into my hull or anyone else's hull, I don't need to worry about rubbing against it. Now, the rudder and the dagger board. The plans here called for a fixed one-piece rudder, which, knowing how I would be getting intimate with Connemara soil or rocks or sand or whatever, that just wasn't going to work. So I was going to make it, put a pivot in it, but I couldn't find any plan for it. So I had to design one from scratch, which took me time. Had I done it before, it wouldn't have been that difficult really. So it does pivot up. I'm pleased with the design. It works well. The overall dimensions of the rudder and the profile, the underwater profile is unchanged, but that did work well. One thing I will point out from that hole there, every hole through anywhere on the boat, I over-drilled. I drilled it bigger than it needed to be, filled it with epoxy, and then drilled the epoxy the size I actually wanted it. And that took an awful lot of time and an awful lot of effort. And I don't know if, for a boat that's out of the water for 8 months of the year, I don't know if it was worth doing it or not, but I did it anyway. The spars, I made the mast laminated. I cut it into 4 and I used a router to remove the center. So I've a hollow mast, basically. I particularly wanted all the spars and the oars to be able to stow behind a bunk on the boat. So I changed the plans so that the spars would be 2-piece. But then I had to try and figure out how to make them 2-piece or how to mate them together. Paul Keogh suggested a scaffolding, the thing you use for joining scaffolding together. So I got one of those. And because I had the mast hollowed out here, I made about a 1-foot-long piece of epoxy, stuffed as much as I could with matting in a PVC pipe, and then split the pipe open and then bonded that in one of the pieces, and it goes into the other one here. So it was a bit of work. That joint works out well enough, but it turns out I never dismantle the mast. When we're on the boat, I just lash it to the lifelines. So having it in 2 pieces wasn't any real advantage. On the sprit, I used a much simpler and much better approach that worked really well. I just got a bit of PVC pipe, bonded it to one half there, coated it all in a few coats of fiberglass cloth, and that works very, very nicely. One problem I did have with the spars is that I epoxied them. I put 2 coats of epoxy on them. I let it dry. It was absolutely hard after 2 days. I came along with my 1-part Epiphan's varnish, varnished them. The next day it wasn't dry. The next day it wasn't dry. 5 days later, it was still as wet as it was when I put it on. So I cleaned them off easily enough with white spirit and put on 2-part Epiphan's, and it dried perfectly. The sail, all Danny says in the instructions that he gave is the sail can be professionally made by Duckworks. Alternatively, it is an easy sail to make yourself. It can be made absolutely flat to the dimensions given on the sail plan. So, and this being the sail plan here, a lot of people make their own sail out of tarpaulin or something like that, and they say it's fine. I got one. I went to Philip Watson, who made me one, an absolutely beautiful sail, and you'll see it in action later. He did say that he thought it was quite a large sail to, even though it's 50 square foot, that it needed some visual thing on it. He said, get a bit of a pattern on it, it'll look good. So he gave me some red number cloth and he said, have a bit of fun with that. So we thought about it and thought really what we'd like would be, which sailor's favorite bird isn't a gannet? So a profile of a gannet on both sides of the sail. Then for the first time, putting the sail and the spars together to try and figure out where to put the different fittings on the sails themselves. Now, when Cormac was over with me, he said that you'll have a bit of wood left over. I'll show you how to make a pair of oars. Now, God between us in all innocence, I thought that the poor man had taken temporary leave of his senses, suggesting that I could make a pair of oars. But he says, no, it's straightforward enough. Just take your time. I'll explain it to you. And I sort of said no on the day. And I thought afterwards, well, you know, I'll give it a go. So I did. I made the oars exactly as Cormac said. One issue I had, or one problem, is it's very, very difficult to find out the dimensions of anything on the internet. You know, what are the right length of blade, etc., etc. I initially had them that size and they looked too big. I made them this size and they turn out, they work quite well. I also tapered the shafts. The shafts are quite a bit thinner here than they are here. As I gathered, it helps balance the oar, gives a nicer oar, and also gives a bit of spring in an oar, which apparently is good. I got leather to make collars on the oars, and I was very proud of the job I did there. Although I wasn't quick at removing them when I started using the boat, and I bought the Finnish plastic collars with that mean the oars won't slip out of the rowlocks. You'll see a picture of them later. One thing here, just incidentally, in this photograph, I covered a table in a bedroom I was using with an old kid's shower curtain just to protect the table. Now, unbeknownst to me, that type of plastic is absolutely non-stick with epoxy. So I couldn't have picked a better surface. You could epoxy stuff right down, clamped to that cloth, and then the next day just pull it off as easily as anything. So that was good. What I'll do here now is I will show you a short video of the building. You'll just see slightly different elements of that build. Lofting has been completed, but none of the panels have been cut out yet. There is one of the aft side panels. Here are more of the sheets with different components. I think there are 2 bulkheads there on that one, and maybe the 4 bottom panel as well. So she's been assembled, but none of the tapes have been put on yet. She is ready to be taped at this stage. Those bits of string you see in the hull were used to check that she was true and aligned correctly. The aft inside seams there have been taped. Peel ply over them. The transom with its reinforced panel. The 4 seams have dried and the peel ply off them. They have yet to be grounded and smoothed. This gives a good view of the 6-inch increase in shear in both the 4 panel and the side panel there. The hull has been turned over. The seams have been ground and rounded. The external seams haven't been taped yet, as you can see, but they're ready for taping there. In some places you can see that there's actually no plywood at all. Like there, it's been, you're just ground through and radiused through to the fillet and the tape on the other side. Our new dog Skipper, who we got at 10 weeks old when we were about 2 weeks into the build. So the gunnels have been applied here, the aft seat section has been added. I kept a log of all the time I spent working on her, and at this stage it's only been 42% of the total effort. So not even halfway there at this stage. The custom designed rowing seat that was needed as I changed added the rear seat section, so I had to make design changes there. And the finished oars, the tips covered in Aramid tape, the shafts tapered and the handles left unvarnished. I'd like to say a few words of thanks at this stage to Cormac Louth, who gave me great guidance, advice and help in the early stages. He gave me great encouragement and made me believe that I could do it. To Paul Keogh, Jerry Keane and John Elston, who lent me a lot of tools and clamps, etc., and also gave me good advice. To Joe Foley for his advice and encouragement, tools and fittings. to Michael Weed, who gave me great encouragement and generously shared with me many insights he gained during his time at the Boat Building Academy at Lyme Regis. And to Winky Nixon, who gave me expert opinion on the options facing me regarding raising the shear. Now, how long did this all take? Well, Danny Greene in his instructions says, costs and building time will certainly vary with the skills of the builder and the sources of materials. I would estimate the time and cost of building the rowing version of Chameleon at 80 to 100 hours and $500 to $600. The sailing version would require an additional 30 to 40 hours and approximately $150 to $250. Now, those prices, I think, are all from the early 80s. So he says 80 to 100 hours for the rowing version and 100 to 140 hours for the sailing version. Reports from others who built it say it needs at least twice that. So that would bring it to sort of 300 hours for the sailing version. Given that this was my first attempt at building it and I was making design changes, I was happy that it would take 50% more again. Anyway, I kept diligent records of how long I was spending each day and what I achieved. And the final total was 510 hours. Now that excludes time on researching, on making design, on designing the design changes, and on trying to source chandlery, which took me hours, as I wasn't at times even familiar with what name of the thing I was trying to look for. In terms of cost, at the start, I resolved to keep very good records, which I did initially, but as time went on and I spent perhaps more money, I may not have been as entirely diligent as I would have been. Now, I didn't knowingly forget anything or leave anything out, but it's very possible that I did. But the amount of these materials came to €3,078. Now, I'm well aware that over the past year, things like wood and plywood has increased a lot in price. Anyway, we'll now go on and talk about, and I'll show what she has been like during how she's behaved and how she's sailed. But first, I just want to go a little more detail into the Spritzel. It's believed to be a very old rig, dating to at least 200 BC. It originated in the Eastern Mediterranean. This carving here, which came off a sarcophagus found in Ostia near the head of the Tiber River, is believed to date from the late 3rd century AD, and historians say it's the earliest recorded view of a Spritzel. I'll take the word for it. It wouldn't have been immediately obvious to me that that's what it was, but that's what they say. It's a sail. We saw Folkhard earlier say about it being so widely used around the Northern Hemisphere, but it's widely used around the world. Here's a more recent picture from Bangladesh featuring, Spritzel, a definite Spritzel. I assume it's raised so high because it's sailing in marshes to gain the extra wind, but it's widely used. It's a widely used rig. But what of the rig itself? It's a 4-sided sail. The names are the same. The names of the parts of it are the same as a gaff sail. The main difference is this whole thing of the sprit. So you have the sprit, as we've described, or as Folkhard and others have described when I read out earlier, but it can be difficult to understand if you haven't seen it before. The sprit pushes the peak up, basically. It gives you head tension and leech tension. And it does that by there's some type of purchase here to really lever the base of the sprit up so that the peak is forced up. In my case on Báidín, it's a 4-to-1 purchase. So basically you pull down here and it applies a lot of pressure up there. Now I have found to sail her, you end up adjusting the snotter almost as frequently as you adjust the main sheet. So it's a critical part of sailing her. That's sailing. Now there's another line that's really useful, which is the brailing line. So this isn't actually for sailing. This is for the opposite. It's a little light line attached to the mast, goes out one side of the sail comes back the other side of the sail around a block here, and it also goes, it goes around the sprit. And when you want to, you simply ease off the snotter, pull the brailing line, and the whole sail is furled in like a second. It is absolutely brilliant. For example, here is a shot, just pull in somewhere, furl that sail in, I would say, 2 seconds. I actually wrap the brailing line around the mast and sail once or twice and just secure it. As we're talking about this, and because the mast is unstayed, just lift it out and lay it in the boat if you want extra security, or if you wanted to reduce windage further. As with all boomless sails, the sheeting angle is critical. The sheet needs to be led so that the load is split evenly between the leech and the foot of the sail. This isn't as important where there's a boom, because the boom and kicker is used to give the leech tension. When close hauled, the sheet point on the hull needs to be on a line going through the mast, not less than around 10 degrees off the midship line. So in this diagram here, there is the 10-degree line. The sheeting point cannot be nearer the center of the boat than about there. It sounds complicated, but you sort of get the hang of it. Also, that sheeting angle needs to be increased as you go off the wind. You need to move that sheeting angle forward. Again, it sounds complicated. We'll see in a minute how I achieve that on Báidín. I've been saying what are the good sides and the upsides of the Spritzel. What are the downsides? There are two, really. Firstly, it can't be successfully reefed. Effectively, it's all or nothing. Secondly, as for the reasons given earlier, it needs to be a small-ish sail. It can't be, once you get to the size of a sail needed for a 16-foot boat, the sail, the Spritzel itself becomes too big to handle. One solution is to have multiple Spritzels, go for a catch or a schooner. Here's one that Phil Bulger designed for exactly that purpose. She's a Sharpie, she's a 39-foot cruiser. Each sail is relatively small, but overall, apparently, she's easily managed by one person. She's designed to be sailed either with 4 sails, or drop the jib and the center sail for 2, or drop all except the center sail for 3. Note also here what's called the sprit boom, which is like a sprit, but used to get the clew, to tension out the clew and to give you leech tension. It allows you be less strict with your sheeting angles. So how did I do these things on Báidín? My first attempt was to have a rope horse between the 2 aft quarters and to have a block over it that would, self-tack, etc. But as you can see there, the sheeting angle is just a few inches off the center line. So that was not successful and it didn't work. So I then, and this worked very successfully, I then drilled a couple of holes through the gunnels on each side and put light lines through them. You can see the two of them there. And I have the sheet connected through a block attached to a snap shackle. So you tack, you simply remove the shackle here and snap it on there. Dead simple. You're going off the wind, just move it a bit forward. So that is for the sheet, for the sheeting position for the mainsail. The other thing I mentioned was the snotter. My first attempt at the snotter was to cleat it off on the mast. But as I said, you end up wanting to adjust that snotter very frequently. So I adapted and I put in a block lower down, and this block is too small. I need to get a bigger one. And I run the snotter back to a cleat near the helming position. So when helming, you can adjust the snotter as easily as the other. Here is both halves. They float independently and they're there ready to hoist. I wanted to keep to stow her on my swimming platform. So here is a picture of where she is stowed on the swimming platform, totally out of the way. It adds a little extra windage, but not much, particularly if I have the cockpit tent up. The increase in windage is fairly minimal. She's out of the way of all wash. Even if we're leaned over quite a bit, she's completely out of the way of wash there. If we have a following sea, likewise, it won't catch in her. So she stows well there and stows easily. Just to have a very short video showing that from a few different angles, really just nips in there. I couldn't be more pleased with where she stows. I need to do some more work on the mechanism to hoist her, but that's another day's work. So what about the performance of the boat itself and how did she behave? First role was a tender. So for moving people from A to B and moving supplies and goods to and from the boat, really good. You know, it takes 3 people very comfortably. We've rowed her with 4 when it was calm, and that worked well. So as a tender, as a means to reliably and easily get from A to B, great. As a means to land and explore, she's been to lots of places. She's been used, and I won't say abused, but she's used hard. Here we are in the Maori Islands off Tralee, beached here down in near Castletown Bear in Dunboy, you know, dragged up on the rock. Here was Inishvickalawn, just tied up to there. Here is, say, we're in Ballinskelligs. Had about a half a mile sail from where we were anchored. Just come in here, furl the sail, as I mentioned, drop the mast and just tie it off. So as a means to access places and get in, it works well. Towing her, she tows well. I've since made a bridle, sort of a triangular bridle. She works well, she tows well. It does slow us down, as you'd expect. It probably slows us down a bit more than towing the inflatable, which I wasn't expecting. I'd say it knocks half a knot, maybe a bit more off us when we're towing her. As a fun boat to just sail and have fun in, it's just brilliant. She sails beautifully, and I have a video of her sailing in a second. She really sails, to my mind, fantastically. She'll go in a knot or 2 of wind, well, maybe 2 knots, she will move reliably enough. I've been out in her when it's been gusting 30 knots, and it just is not an issue. The boat doesn't heel that much. The Spritzel, I'd read this, and I can't really describe it. It's a funny way that the Spritzel itself slips wind when if a very sudden gust hits. So she sails well, she's easy to manage, very predictable. I have, for instance, sailed her twice from Barlow into Loch Hyne, around Loch Hyne and out again. Okay, I go with the tide in both directions, but in one case, the wind was dead against me going in. She just is a great boat to sail. Now, one thing that actually surprised me, we were down in Kenmare River, we were in Sneem, and we were going over to Kilmachalog, and my son and daughter said they'd race us in Báidín. So off they sailed and off we sailed. And on our main boat, she's not a racer by any means, she's a heavy enough cruiser, but she sails well. Our sails are 5-year-old laminate, they're good. To cut a long story short, Báidín was able to make that on 1 tack. We weren't. Now that is an artist's impression, but it is as accurate as I could get it. And in the video we'll get to next, you'll actually see them arriving from that passage. So just to finish off, I have a video of a couple of minutes showing her sailing in as many different conditions as I could get. Here is my son setting off from Kilmachalog to sail across the Kenmare River over to Sneem. That's a distance of about 4 nautical miles. Light winds there, in fact the winds drop to nothing before he reaches the other side. Here they are sailing around Sneem Harbour. Light winds, but 3 on board, and she goes beautifully in those conditions.
Yes, good.
Extremely light wind, in fact virtually none, as you can see there from the leaves in Kilmachalog Bay. Here the 2 of them are arriving back in Kilmachalog after sailing across the Kenmare River.
in Sneem Harbour in lighter conditions. Here now we have fresher conditions in Sneem Harbour. I'd have to say that Sneem Harbour, in fact the whole Kenmare River, is absolutely beautiful. We were there in July 2021. Gorgeous weather for the 2-3 weeks we spent in Kenmare River. This is in Adrigole. Note the sheeting points on the gunnel. A beautiful morning in Clifton. Just returning to the boat after having sailed up and explored all the way up to Ardbear Bridge and back, a distance of about 4 miles. I experimented using the oar as a whisker pole and very successful at presenting more sail to the wind. In Kilmacalogue again, that fantastic day with Ed and Fran Mags. Beautiful day sailing, beautiful conditions, beautiful place. Some fresher conditions now up in Duncairn Harbour, up near the head of Kenmare River. She's easy and predictable to manage. Now look at how she accelerates. This is in the anchorage in Passage East at Ahanesk House. So that's how she sails. But what about motoring and rowing? Here we are in Court McSherry, the 2.5 horsepower Yamaha, driving her beautifully along. And she rows well as well.
Right, I could go on for a lot longer, but I will cut it there. I hope you enjoyed that, and certainly delighted to have any questions you'd like.
Oh, thank you very much, Mark. That was magnificent, very interesting. And for a man who has always proclaimed himself to be handless, you showed some incredible skills. So it scared the life out of me to try something like that. I was interested when you said you're lofting. Once you had the measurements, it went very smoothly. That sounds like quite a statement to make when you're doing that for the first time.
I knew. I mean, lofting has this reputation of being very difficult. So maybe I measured and I remeasured and I remeasured again. But apart from my difficulty with Imperial, it did go smoothly. But I did check everything twice or 3 times.
That's good. And what I'm more concerned about is when you took the kids' shower curtain and used the kids' bedroom as your boat building place. I mean, I don't ask you to make a confession because you haven't been cautioned properly, but I am wondering what happened to the kids at that stage.
Well, because I kicked the kids out, I was able to afford to build the boat.
Oh, fantastic. Can you give us a talk on doing that as well, please?
Mark,
When you were motoring her there, she seemed to be high at the bow. Did you need a bit of weight in the front of her when you're motoring, or did you normally lie level?
She. I mean, the bow is high, but particularly once it wasn't nearly high enough on one occasion. We were beached on the Great Blasket Island, and trying to get off there, I won't say we were nearly swamped, but it felt like we were nearly swamped. So it does look high, but it's not overly high.
Fantastic. Absolutely fantastic. Any other questions by people?
Mark, I wondered about the pressure on where the mast goes through the deck. Is there not considerable pressure at that point between the mast step and where it goes through the deck as it's unstayed?
Yeah, on the underneath, I mean, there's a reinforced, that deck on top of the locker is 6 mil ply. There is a labyrinth of reinforcing battens and a backing plate there. And then there is a PVC pipe that extends all the way up from that block you saw up through the deck. So it's about 2-3 millimeters above the deck. And it does take pressure, but it's not anything I've ever been worried about.
Right.
Yeah, well, there's one question, Mark, I was wondering about. You were saying it's easier to assemble the two halves together when they're floating in the water as opposed to being on the deck, which I can well understand. But I was wondering, how difficult is it to align the two parts up when they're bobbing about in the water, especially if it's not perfect conditions?
Yeah.
Well, there is, and I didn't show it there, there is a protrusion on, in fact, I may be able to quickly show a picture of it, which would be much quicker than, I don't know if I have a picture offhand, but basically on the aft, you might remember for the dagger board, I had to cut the mating bulkhead on the forward section. That wasn't actually for the dagger board itself. That was to have a slot for a protrusion added to the aft section to guide the two in. So it actually
like a big dowel. Yeah, it's a bit like a big dowel, really.
Well, it's a block that's about
like sort of thing.
Yeah, exactly. And it would be very difficult without that, but it's simple enough with it.
Right.
And how was it fixed then, Mark? Is it bolts or clamps, or what way is it?
There are 4 bolts, 4 stainless steel bolts. 2 of them are at the upper end of the mating bulkheads, and 2 of them go through that seat unit, or involved in that seat unit. Now, I changed the position. The plans called for 3 of those bolts in total, with one of them being a bit higher than I had. I understand now why it's a bit higher, because it's over the water line. So it seeps, water can seep very, very slowly through it where I have it. I need to get a bit of neoprene or something like that, a washer. But yeah, so it's 4, I think they're 12 millimeter stainless bolts that you just bolt together, and nothing would shift them.
Mark, brother Rodney here.
Hi, Rodney.
Two thoughts. The bolts that you use to assemble the 2 pieces, 2 halves together, you could get a T-bone welded, a T welded onto the head, and you could get ears welded onto the nuts, so you wouldn't need spanners. Would that be an option?
Some people did that all right on the internet. The jury is out as to whether that you need to tension them quite a bit. So I just have 2 dedicated spanners that I bought, and I tighten it with that.
As long as they're tied to the hull and they can't fall overboard.
Exactly.
Secondly, why, with regards to the keel bands, why didn't, is it an option for you to put the metal bands on it and then put your Kevlar strips over that to waterproof them, since you're worried about drilling and rot?
It may be, but the Kevlar seems to, it may have been an option. Yeah, if I was doing it again, it's something I would I could certainly think of.
Right.
Mark, if you don't mind, you possibly told us, but what's the overall length and what's the beam?
The length overall is about 10'9". It should be 10'6", but because I extended the the shear, the stem therefore sticks out a bit more. So it's about 10'9". The beam, I should know this offhand, I think it is about 4 foot.
Very, very good. Not very different from a mirror dinghy, would you say?
No. I mean, it's they come from, they are very similar. Yeah.
And the last question, second question, really, what's her finished weight without all the bits and pieces, without the spars and all that?
I don't know. Is it too heavy? Is the answer. In my inexperience, if I was in any doubt, I added more. And so I don't honestly know. Each half is not that easily handled by a single person. I can hoist her easily enough. I've little 4-to-1 handy billies. I can hoist them easily enough there. But if I was, it'd be interesting to do it again and try and do it much more lightly.
Very good. Thanks a minute.
Yep, not at all.
Hello, everybody. Can you hear me there?
Yes, indeed.
Yep. I'm a visitor. I'm Trailock O'Brien, and I bumped into Mark during the summer. We were cruising. My wife and myself were cruising on the west coast. So one evening, a nice boat came into the moorings at Clare Island, and my wife and myself were in the cockpit having a drink, and we talked to each other for about 40 seconds, talking about the nice boat coming in. And at the end of the 40 seconds, we realized she was talking about the big cruiser, and I was talking about the dinghy towing behind it. So, we didn't actually talk to them at that point. But then later in the summer, when we were coming out of the water, actually, Mark, you were coming out of the water, I think, as well in Kilrush. I hijacked you when you came in, and so basically, before they could go ashore or get a shower or get some food, I was in Báidín rowing around in Kilrush Creek. Now, I've built a few small boats. I've built a bulger cart hopper. I've built a few CLC sea kayaks and things like that by the stitch and glue method. So the first thing I'd say is Mark did a brilliant job on this boat. It's a fabulous finish. She's really, really well made, and all the best materials. So on the comment Paddy made there, she is quite heavy, but I think she'll last. I think it's probably the right thing to do for a working boat. You could probably build her a good bit lighter, but as soon as I sat into her and rowed her around the creek, now you didn't say much, Mark, about the rowing, but the boat rows absolutely beautifully. I mean, you were really keen for me to hoist the sail, and you got me to say, now I'm a bad helmsman, and then I'm worse as a sail trimmer. But even in the tiny breeze we had in Kilrush Creek, I was able to sail downwind and then tack her back and bring her. I thought I'd be rowing to get back to the pontoon, but the boat just goes upwind very, very easily. When you luff her, she just loses way. I was really surprised. So the boat rows extremely well, although the oars probably need to be customized. I think you had the leathers the wrong length or something when I was in her. But she sails, as you were saying, she sails fabulously as well. I think now Philip Watson made the sail for you, and it has a nice bit of draft in it. But I mean, I didn't trim her or anything. As I say, downwind, upwind, I didn't adjust the position. So I think I was extremely impressed with the boat. So the reason I had spotted it was that I had already bought Chameleon plans, but I hadn't started building. So I actually have my plywood panels sitting in one of the boys' rooms, waiting for the weather to warm before I put any epoxy on. So just thanks, old gaffers, for hosting the talk, and you did a really good job, Mark. Okay, so thanks very much.
Thank you very much, and great to see you again.
I think it's a better job than the professionals. I think it's a magnificent job, Mark. Far better than most professional mass-produced boats. Fantastic. I think it's
very kind of you to say so, Dennis.
Wonderful.
Mark, if I might just say, it's not a rig you see very often in this part of the world, the spritsail. Apart from perhaps if you're over in the London River, you'll see some of the Thames barges that are still knocking about. But I spent quite a good bit of time at sea out in between Calcutta and what is now Bangladesh, was down East Pakistan, and there was a huge amount of sailing types of vessels out there, and quite a lot of spritsails to be seen among them. I used to keep notes at the time. Unfortunately, I didn't take an awful lot of photographs. But I might just interest you to know that in the Royal St. George Yacht Club, there's a lovely picture by Richard Bridges Beachy depicting a regatta day taken from the back end of the back of the Royal St. George, and there's a small vessel in it with spritsails, with 2 masts with spritsails. It's the only one I've ever seen depicted around Dublin Bay with a spritsail. So congratulations on the wonderful job that you did.
Oh, well, thank you, and thanks again, Cormac.
Wonderful talk indeed. Thank you.
Mark, how does the dog Skipper feel about the boat?
He loves it, actually. I mean, this is our first season on either of the 2 boats. It's like he knows he's going for a walk if he's on it, and he's good. He gets on. he likes even just going out for a pleasure sail. I'd often bring him out, and he's great company in the boat, and he likes it. Yeah.
Mark, can I ask you some question?
Of course.
About the spritsail, is it completely cut flat, or is there some sort of a curve in the luff of the sail?
Oh no, there is a curve. So Philip Watson, he is I think, a very successful racer over the years, and he's based in Dublin, out in Malahide, and he viewed this as a challenge, and there certainly is a curve in it. The comment about it being flat was Danny Greene, the designer, said you can make it flat, but Philip said no. And in those videos, I mean, she does have quite a three-dimensional aspect to it. So no, she is not flat.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome, Rick.
Mark, I can confirm it's 13% teeth at half height.
Ah, sorry, I didn't notice you there, Philip.
I was hidden most of the time, but as you're asking the question that I can probably answer. Yeah, 13% of depth in the middle.
Ah, but she's, as you see, you haven't seen her sailing before, I think. I might have shown you a static photograph, but when I was putting together that video montage, I was really impressed just the way she fills the sails.
Yeah, she's super. Very well done. She's very well built. Hi.
Mark, have you logged how many miles you've done on her?
No. In fact, no, I haven't. I would have no idea. But speaking of logging, we were anchored up by, I'm just trying to remember the name, but up past Drownstone, there is a deserted village. Can't remember the name of it offhand. I'm sure you'd remember it, Cian. And you can go further up there. There's a strong current. Anyway, I was out sailing, and I have a little, on my phone, I see the GPS speed, and I was sailing so well. It was unbelievable. Like 5.5 knots had been my previous record, and I was touching 6.25, and I thought I've really nailed this sailing, Lar. And that was okay, but coming back nearly took me about 4 hours. Against the tide, yeah.
But it's fantastic, and your video of Lochine, which I've seen previously, is something to behold. That's quite fantastic.
It is, and now it would have been too long to include bits of that there, but yeah, I mean, it was magical, really awesome, sailing into Lochine, and it was one of those July days. I mean, July this year was so beautiful. It was early, no, in fact, it was late June, and it was just magical, and just sailing around there, and there were lots of people out doing their yoga or their Tai Chi or whatever, and I was silently passing them by, and they sort of would take a double take. No, it was good fun.
Yeah, well, it was a joy to spot you in the various locations that I did see in during the year.
Likewise.
And well done. She's fantastic. Great credit to you.
Oh, thank you.
Mark, can I ask you one more question? You talked about adjusting the snotter probably as much as the main sheet. And what did that do for the sail?
What it does is it basically allows it to fill. I couldn't describe it in technical terms. What it does is it makes it look right, and it makes all the telltales flow smoothly. In all of the video you saw tonight, it was properly adjusted, and the sail was filling beautifully. When it's not, you'll notice a bit of a crease down one way or the other. It just doesn't look right. You get a feel for it. I mean, I can't remember which of the writers. I think it was Folkhard saying that after you get used to sailing the Spritzel, it's easy. You do get a feel for it. I mean, I've a much better feel for that than I do for the Bermudan main on my bigger boat. Yeah,
and of course the benefit of the smaller sail and the smaller boat.
Oh, yeah.
Like people say, you should always learn to sail in a dinghy.
Yeah. So when the snotter tension is incorrect, you just see it's creased in one way or the other. If it's over tight, it's creased from the head to the tack, and if it's not tight enough, it's creased the other way.
Thank you very much, Mark. That was a fantastic talk, really instructive and very, very impressive.
Well, you're very welcome, and I hope I didn't go on too long.